My best friend called me crying and said that my boyfriend was obsessed with her. So I woke her up from her delusion. Me and Jasmine had been best friends since middle school when she moved from Arizona and didn't know anyone. I introduced her to my friend group, helped her catch up in classes, and we became inseparable. We went to different colleges but stayed close, talking every day and visiting each other monthly. After graduation, we both moved back to our hometown and got apartments 10 minutes apart. That's when I started dating Alex. Alex worked at the engineering firm downtown, and we met through my cousin's birthday party. He was shy, funny, and genuinely kind. Jasmine was happy for me at first, saying it was about time I found someone decent after my string of terrible relationships. She'd come to our movie nights, join us for dinner, and everything was normal for about 4 months. Then Jasmine started acting weird. She'd text me after hanging out saying Alex kept staring at her. I'd laugh it off because Alex barely made eye contact with anyone besides me due to his social anxiety. She'd say he was finding excuses to sit next to her when we all went out. In reality, I always sat in the middle with Alex on one side and Jasmine on the other. She started dressing up more when she knew Alex would be around, wearing low-cut tops and asking if she looked good. Alex never noticed because he was usually showing me memes on his phone or talking about work. One night, Jasmine called me crying at 11 p.m. She was sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. She kept saying she was sorry and didn't mean for it to happen. I thought someone died. Finally, she managed to say that Alex was in love with her and she didn't know how to handle it. I asked what she meant. She said she'd been picking up on signs for weeks and it was killing her to keep this from me. I asked what signs. She said he always laughed at her jokes. He laughed at everyone's jokes because he was polite. She said he complimented her new haircut last week. He said it looked nice after she directly asked him 3 times if he noticed anything different. She said he texted her about my birthday gift ideas, which proved he was using me as an excuse to talk to her. I reminded her I literally asked him to text her because she was helping me plan the party. She said I was in denial and she could prove it. The next day, Jasmine showed up at my apartment with a whole presentation. She had analyzed Alex's social media likes and noticed he'd liked 5 of her photos in the past year. 5 photos out of hundreds she posted. She said his favorite coffee shop was near her gym, which meant he was hoping to run into her. His favorite coffee shop was there before she ever joined that gym. She said he mentioned her name 12 times at dinner last week. We were literally talking about her new job, so obviously her name came up. She started crying again, saying she never wanted to hurt me, but the heart wants what it wants. She actually said that. I asked if Alex ever told her he had feelings for her. She said he didn't need to use words when his actions were so obvious. I called Alex right there on speaker, asked him directly what he thought about Jasmine. He said she seemed nice, but kind of intense lately, and asked if she was okay. Jasmine grabbed my phone and told Alex he didn't need to hide anymore, that I knew about their connection. Alex asked what connection. She said the way he looked at her, talked to her, how he was always trying to be near her. Alex said he was confused and asked if Jasmine was drunk. She started yelling that he was gaslighting her and they both knew what was between them. Alex told me my friend needed professional help and hung up. Jasmine said his denial proved he was in love with her. 2 days later, Jasmine texted Alex saying I gave her permission to explore their feelings and asked him to meet her for coffee. Alex sent me the texts immediately and asked if Jasmine was having a mental breakdown. I confronted Jasmine and she said she was testing him to prove his feelings. She literally thought he'd jump at the chance to be with her. When he didn't respond to her follow-up texts, she said he was playing hard to get. She started showing up at his work during lunch. Security had to escort her out twice. She told the security guard she was Alex's girlfriend, and I was the crazy ex who wouldn't let go. The security guard called Alex to confirm, and Alex said he'd never dated her and to call the police if she came back. She joined his gym and would stand next to him on the treadmills. He switched gyms. She found out which one and joined that too. He started working out at home. She told our entire friend group that Alex was sending mixed signals and leading her on while staying with me out of pity. Most of them knew she was being insane, but a few started questioning things because she was so convinced. I had to show them the unhinged texts she'd sent both of us. The breaking point came when she showed up at Alex's parents' house during Sunday dinner. Alex's mom opened the door with her reading glasses still perched on her nose, looking at Jasmine with this confused smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She asked how Jasmine knew their address since they'd only met twice before at casual dinners. Jasmine didn't answer, just pushed past her into the house saying she needed to talk to Alex without me there manipulating everything. I heard Alex's voice from the dining room getting higher and panicked, asking his mom what was happening. His dad's chair scraped against the floor as he stood up fast. I was still at my apartment when my phone buzzed with Alex's text that just said, "Help, she's here," and my stomach dropped because I knew exactly who he meant. Alex's dad walked into the entryway and told Jasmine in this firm voice that she needed to leave right now. Jasmine's eyes filled with tears, and she said she just needed 5 minutes to explain everything, that Alex had been secretly reaching out to her, and she couldn't keep pretending anymore. Alex's parents looked at each other with these worried faces because their son was literally backing away from Jasmine toward the kitchen. Alex's mom put her hand on his shoulder and asked if he was okay. Jasmine kept talking about signs and hidden messages, and how Alex's love for her was so obvious to everyone except his controlling girlfriend. Alex's dad repeated that she needed to leave, louder this time. Jasmine sat down on their couch like she lived there and said she wasn't going anywhere until Alex admitted his true feelings. I drove to Alex's parents' house going way over the speed limit, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. When I pulled up 10 minutes later, Jasmine was sitting on their front porch with her arms crossed. Alex's mom was standing by the door looking completely lost about what to do. Jasmine saw me get out of my car and immediately started talking to Alex's mom about how I'd been emotionally abusing Alex for months. She said I kept him away from his friends, monitored his phone, and made him feel guilty for having any life outside our relationship. Alex's mom looked at me like she was trying to figure out if any of this could possibly be true. I walked up the porch steps and Jasmine stood up, getting right in my face. She said Alex deserved someone who trusted him, someone who didn't need to control every second of his day. I could see the neighbors' curtains moving as people watched this scene play out on a quiet Sunday evening. I tried to keep my voice calm and told Jasmine she needed professional help. She laughed this bitter laugh and said that's exactly what manipulative people say when they're losing control. Alex's dad came outside with his phone in his hand and said he was calling the police. Jasmine's whole face changed and she screamed that I was the one who needed help, that my insecurity was so bad I had to invent this whole story about her being obsessed. She yelled about how I couldn't handle that Alex might have feelings for someone else, someone better. More neighbors came outside now, standing in their yards watching. An older man from across the street started walking over asking if everything was all right. Jasmine turned to him and said her boyfriend's crazy ex was harassing her. Alex appeared in the doorway looking pale and exhausted. The neighbor looked confused, asking Alex if he knew what was going on. 2 police cars pulled up about 5 minutes later. Jasmine immediately stopped yelling and wiped her face, switching to this calm, rational voice that made my skin crawl because it was so fake. She smiled at the officer and said there'd been a misunderstanding, that she came to visit her boyfriend and his parents overreacted. The officer asked who the boyfriend was, and Jasmine pointed at Alex. The officer walked over to Alex and asked directly if this woman was his girlfriend. Alex said no, he'd never dated her and she needed to leave. The officer asked if Alex wanted her here, and Alex said absolutely not. Jasmine's face did this thing where it just crumpled, like someone had reached inside and pulled all her bones out. She looked at Alex with these huge wounded eyes and said he didn't have to lie anymore, that she understood his family was putting pressure on him. The officer asked Jasmine to come with him to her car. She stood up slowly, staring at Alex the whole time like she was waiting for him to change his mind. The officer had to physically guide her by the elbow because she kept stopping and turning back. When they got to her car, the officer talked to her for a few minutes while his partner took statements from Alex and his parents. Jasmine got in her car finally and started the engine. As she drove away, she rolled down her window and screamed that Alex was making a huge mistake. She yelled that one day he'd realize what he gave up, that he'd come crawling back when he got tired of being controlled. Her voice got quieter as she drove down the street, but we could still hear her. Alex's mom grabbed my hand and squeezed it hard. She was shaking. Inside the house, Alex sat on the couch with his head in his hands. His whole body was trembling and his parents kept asking what the hell just happened. I sat down next to Alex and started explaining from the beginning, from the night Jasmine called me crying about Alex being in love with her. I told them about the presentation with the social media analysis, about her showing up at his work, about the text claiming I gave permission for them to date. Alex's mom's mouth fell open and she kept saying she had no idea, that Jasmine seemed so normal when they met her before. His dad paced around the living room getting angrier as I talked. When I finished, his dad said we needed to talk to a lawyer first thing Monday morning. He said this wasn't just weird friend drama anymore, this was stalking, and we needed legal protection. That night, Alex stayed at my apartment because neither of us wanted to be alone. We lay in bed, but neither of us could sleep. Every sound made us both jump. A car door slamming outside had Alex sitting straight up. When my neighbor's cat knocked over something in the hallway, I was out of bed before I even realized I was moving. Around 3 a.m, Alex admitted he was scared of what Jasmine might do next. He said every time we set a boundary or told her no, she just became more convinced they had this deep connection. He talked about how she'd shown up at 2 different gyms, how she'd told security at his work that she was his girlfriend, how she genuinely seemed to believe her own lies. I realized we weren't dealing with a friendship problem anymore. This was a real safety threat, and we needed to treat it that way. Sunday morning, I called my cousin Cordelia, who worked in mental health crisis intervention. She answered on the second ring, even though it was barely 8. I explained everything while Alex made coffee in the kitchen, his hands still shaky. Cordelia listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a minute. Then she said Jasmine's behavior matched something called erotomania. She explained it was a delusional disorder where someone believes another person is in love with them, even when there's clear proof they're not. She said people with erotomania can be completely normal in other areas of their life, but have this one fixed delusion they can't let go of. I asked if it was dangerous, and Cordelia's voice got serious. She said it could be, especially when the delusion gets challenged. Cordelia explained that people with erotomania interpret rejections as secret tests, or proof of hidden feelings. She said when Alex told Jasmine he wasn't interested, Jasmine's brain twisted that into evidence that he was forced to deny their connection. Every boundary we set, every time we said no, just made her more certain. Cordelia told us we needed to document absolutely everything from now on. Save every text, every voicemail, write down every incident with dates and times. She said we needed to stop all direct communication immediately, because any response, even telling her to stop, would feed the delusion. Most importantly, she said we needed legal protection right away. She used the word restraining order and said these situations could turn violent when the person's delusion got threatened enough. I looked at Alex standing in my kitchen doorway holding 2 mugs of coffee, and I saw real fear in his eyes. Monday morning, Alex's dad made a call to someone named Lincoln Abernathy before we even finished breakfast. He handed Alex the phone, and I watched Alex nod along, his jaw tight, saying yes sir and thank you about 6 times. When he hung up, his dad said Lincoln could see us at 10, and we should bring everything. I grabbed my laptop and Alex collected his phone while his mom packed the leftover police report and witness statements into a folder. We drove to Lincoln's office in the business district downtown, a brick building with his name on a brass plaque by the door. The waiting room had leather chairs and magazines nobody ever reads, and a receptionist who smiled too brightly considering why people probably came here. Lincoln came out exactly at 10, a man maybe 50 years old wearing a suit that looked expensive but not flashy. He shook our hands with a firm grip and led us back to his office where he had a yellow legal pad already out on his desk. We sat across from him and I put my laptop between us while Alex set his phone down. Lincoln asked us to start from the beginning and explain everything, so I opened my laptop and pulled up the first weird text Jasmine sent me about Alex staring at her. Lincoln took notes while I talked, his pen moving fast across the yellow paper. I showed him the text where Jasmine said I gave her permission to date Alex, and Lincoln's expression got harder. Alex pulled up the messages Jasmine sent him directly asking to meet for coffee and the follow-up texts when he didn't respond. Lincoln read them twice, his mouth pressed into a thin line. Then Alex showed him the emails from his office security about the 2 incidents where they escorted Jasmine out, and Lincoln asked if he could photograph those with his phone. I found the police report from Sunday dinner on my laptop and turned the screen, so Lincoln could read the whole thing. He scrolled through it slowly, occasionally making small sounds in his throat that weren't quite words. When he finished reading, he sat back in his chair and looked at both of us with an expression I couldn't totally read. He said we had more than enough evidence for a restraining order, way more than most cases he saw. Then he said the word that made my stomach drop: criminal stalking charges. Lincoln explained that what Jasmine did met the legal definition in multiple ways: the workplace harassment, the residential trespassing, the repeated unwanted contact after being told to stop. He said the process would require me and Alex to testify about specific incidents in detail, dates and times, and exactly what happened. His voice got more serious when he said Jasmine would be formally notified of the restraining order filing, and he wanted us prepared that this might trigger another escalation before things got better. He used the word escalation like it was a normal thing to expect, and I realized this was his job, seeing people at their worst and predicting what terrible thing might happen next. We spent the next 3 hours in that office going through every single incident in order. Lincoln had us write detailed statements on his computer, typing out exactly what happened with dates and times for everything we could remember. Alex had to describe the first time Jasmine showed up at his gym, how he felt when he saw her on the treadmill next to him, even though there were 20 empty machines. He typed slowly, stopping every few sentences to take a breath, and I could see his hands shaking slightly over the keyboard. I wrote about the night she called me crying, the presentation she made with the social media analysis, the moment she grabbed my phone to talk to Alex directly. Lincoln asked specific questions about each incident, like did anyone else witness this? Did you tell her explicitly to stop? Did you feel threatened or afraid? Some of the questions felt obvious, but Lincoln said courts needed everything spelled out clearly, no assumptions about what someone meant or felt. Alex got to the part about Jasmine joining his second gym after he switched and he stopped typing completely for a minute. I watched him stare at the screen before he finally wrote that it made him feel violated. Like nowhere was safe. Like she was always going to find him no matter what he did. Lincoln nodded and said that was exactly the kind of detail the judge needed to hear. By the time we finished, my back hurt from sitting in the same chair, and Alex looked completely drained. Lincoln printed everything out and had us review it one more time, then sign at the bottom of each page. He said he'd file the petition for an emergency restraining order first thing Wednesday morning, and we should expect Jasmine to be served with papers within 48 hours of that. That afternoon, my phone rang while Alex and I were eating sandwiches in my car outside a gas station. It was Myra, and she sounded upset before she even said hello. She told me Jasmine had shown up at her apartment that morning crying and saying Alex got his family to threaten her with lawyers. Myra said Jasmine claimed we were ganging up on her because Alex didn't want to admit his feelings publicly, and his parents were helping him hide the truth. I could hear the uncertainty in Myra's voice, like she was starting to question the version Jasmine had been telling everyone. She asked me directly if that was true, if Alex's family really threatened Jasmine. I told her no. Jasmine trespassed at their house during Sunday dinner, and they called the police, which was not a threat, but a legal response to someone breaking the law. Myra went quiet for a few seconds, and when she spoke again, her voice was different, smaller. She said she was starting to realize the version Jasmine told her might not be accurate. She mentioned little things that hadn't made sense, like how Jasmine said Alex texted her constantly but could never show the actual texts, or how the timeline of events kept shifting depending on when Jasmine told the story. I felt this mix of relief that Myra was finally questioning things and anger that it took this long, that Jasmine got to control the narrative for weeks while Alex and I dealt with actual stalking. I told Myra I would send her everything, all the evidence we just gave to Lincoln. I pulled over into a parking lot so I could focus and started forwarding screenshots of Jasmine's texts to Alex, the ones where she said I gave permission for them to date, the ones where she asked him to meet her after he'd already said no. I sent the security incident reports from Alex's office that documented both times they escorted her out. I sent the police report from Sunday with the officer's notes about Jasmine refusing to leave the property and claiming she was there to talk to her boyfriend, which Alex had to correct by saying he'd never dated her. Myra didn't respond for almost 10 minutes, and I sat there watching the 3 dots appear and disappear on my phone screen. Finally, she called me back instead of texting. She said she felt sick that she doubted me, that she'd actually wondered if maybe I was being controlling or jealous like Jasmine suggested. She admitted Jasmine's story had inconsistencies, but her certainty made it believable, the way she could describe these elaborate scenarios with so much detail that it felt like they must have happened. Myra said she should have asked more questions, should have talked to me and Alex directly instead of just accepting Jasmine's version. I told her it was okay, even though part of me was still angry, because I understood how convincing Jasmine could be when she believed her own delusions so completely. Myra said 3 other friends from our group wanted to apologize and hear the real story directly from me. She suggested we meet at the coffee shop on Main Street the next day, somewhere public and neutral. I felt this weird mix of emotions, relief that they were finally listening, but also frustration that it took lawyers and police reports for them to take this seriously. I agreed to meet them at 2 in the afternoon, and after I hung up, Alex reached over and squeezed my hand. He didn't say anything, but I could see in his face that he felt the same complicated mixture of vindication and exhaustion. The next day, I walked into the coffee shop and saw Myra sitting at a big table in the corner with 3 other friends from our group. They all looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats and not quite making eye contact when I first sat down. I opened my laptop and pulled up the timeline I'd created for Lincoln, every incident with dates and descriptions. I turned the screen so they could all see and started walking them through it chronologically. Their faces changed as they read, going from uncertain to shocked to horrified. When they got to the text where Jasmine claimed I gave her permission to date Alex, Myra actually gasped. She said Jasmine had told them Alex sent that message to Jasmine as a test, to see if she'd actually meet him, which was the complete opposite of reality. I showed them Alex's response where he forwarded Jasmine's message to me immediately asking if she was having a breakdown. One of the other friends, a girl named Sarah, put her hand over her mouth and shook her head. Another friend admitted that Jasmine had been privately messaging each of them with slightly different versions of events. Sarah said Jasmine told her that Alex confessed feelings during a work event, but told Myra that he'd shown up at her apartment and told someone else that they'd been secretly texting for months. None of them had compared notes until now because Jasmine specifically asked each person to keep their conversations private, saying she was embarrassed and didn't want everyone knowing her business. They realized now that she'd been manipulating them by controlling the information flow, making sure nobody could piece together that her stories didn't match. A third friend, a guy named Marcus, said Jasmine had asked him to spy on me and report back what I was saying about Alex. He'd thought it was weird at the time, but Jasmine framed it like she was worried about me and wanted to make sure I was okay. He said he felt like an idiot now for not seeing through it. The friend group sat there for another hour talking through everything, and by the end they all agreed to cut contact with Jasmine completely. Myra said they'd provide witness statements if Lincoln needed them, documenting how Jasmine tried to manipulate them and spread false information about Alex. It felt validating to have them finally understand and believe me, but it also felt deeply sad. Our entire social circle was fracturing, splitting into people who supported us, and people who'd have to cut ties with Jasmine. The Jasmine I knew for 15 years, the girl who moved from Arizona and didn't know anyone, who I helped with homework and invited to everything, felt like a complete stranger now. I didn't recognize her in the person who showed up at gyms and workplaces and Sunday dinners, who created elaborate false narratives and believed them so completely that she could convince others. When I left the coffee shop, I felt lighter and heavier at the same time, relieved to have support, but grieving the friendship that was never coming back. Wednesday morning, Lincoln called to say he'd filed for the emergency restraining order at the courthouse. He explained that Jasmine would be served with papers within 48 hours, meaning someone would show up at her apartment or workplace and hand her official legal documents. He said we should expect her to either love bomb us with apologies or escalate with anger when she realized this was legally serious, that the court system was now involved and this wasn't just friend drama anymore. He told us not to respond to any contact attempt regardless of what she said, that any response would reset the harassment clock and potentially weaken our case. He said to document everything, save every text and voicemail and email, note every time she drove past our apartments or showed up somewhere we were. His voice was calm, but firm when he said the next few days were critical, that this was when people with delusions either were accepted reality or doubled down harder. I thanked him and hung up, then immediately told Alex what Lincoln said. We both felt this strange anticipation, like waiting for a storm we knew was coming, but couldn't predict exactly when it would hit. That night, my phone started buzzing around 8 p.m. and didn't stop. Jasmine's name kept flashing on the screen over and over, each call going to voicemail when I didn't pick up. Lincoln had been clear about not answering, about not giving her any opening to claim we were still in contact, or that I was encouraging her behavior. I watched the notifications pile up, 17 missed calls in 2 hours, and each one felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. Alex sat next to me on the couch looking at his own phone, his jaw tight as he scrolled through work emails trying to distract himself from the constant buzzing coming from my device. The voicemails accumulated in my inbox, little red numbers climbing higher and higher. And part of me desperately wanted to listen, because somewhere in my brain I still believed my actual friend might be in there somewhere, might say something that would make this all make sense. But I knew better now. Knew that the Jasmine leaving those messages wasn't the girl I'd known since middle school, and listening would only hurt me more without changing anything about the situation we were trapped in. The next morning, Alex's phone lit up with a text from Quentin at work. I watched his face go pale as he read it. Then he turned the screen toward me without saying anything. Jasmine had shown up at their office building again, apparently thinking she could just walk in and see Alex like nothing had happened, like Lincoln hadn't filed legal paperwork and warned her to stay away. Security recognized her immediately from the previous incidents and called the police before she even made it through the lobby doors. Quentin's text said she'd been arrested for trespassing since the building management had formally banned her from the property after the second time she'd harassed Alex during his lunch break. She was in police custody now, actually arrested with handcuffs and everything, and the reality of how far this had escalated hit me like a truck. This wasn't just friend drama anymore or even stalking that we could document and report. This was criminal charges and jail time and a permanent record that would follow Jasmine for the rest of her life. Lincoln called an hour later and his voice was calm, but I could hear the satisfaction underneath when he explained what happened. Jasmine had spent 4 hours in a holding cell before her parents posted bail and got her released, and he said this actually strengthened our restraining order case significantly because it showed the pattern continuing even after police involvement and official warnings. The judge would take it seriously when we went to court, would see that Jasmine wasn't just confused or going through a rough patch, but actively refusing to respect boundaries even when those boundaries were enforced by law enforcement. He told us to keep documenting everything, to save any texts or calls or attempts at contact, because each piece of evidence made our case stronger and showed we genuinely needed legal protection from someone who wouldn't stop on her own. Friday morning, my phone rang with an unknown number, and I almost didn't answer, thinking it might be Jasmine calling from a different phone to get around being blocked. But something made me pick up, and Jasmine's mom's voice came through the speaker, choked with tears and barely coherent. She said they'd had no idea things had gotten this bad, that Jasmine had been telling them Alex was her boyfriend and I was a jealous ex-friend trying to break them up out of spite. They'd believed her because why wouldn't they believe their own daughter? and now they were devastated to learn the truth from the police report, and the trespassing charges and everything we'd documented. Her mom kept apologizing over and over, saying she should have known something was wrong when Jasmine's stories didn't quite add up, when she refused to let them meet Alex or got defensive when they asked normal questions about the relationship. I felt bad for her because I knew what it was like to watch someone you love disappear into delusion, to realize the person you thought you knew had been replaced by someone you didn't recognize at all. Jasmine's dad got on the phone after her mom couldn't talk anymore through the crying. His voice was tight and controlled, like he was barely holding himself together, and he asked if there was any way to resolve this without legal action, because they were trying to get Jasmine into psychiatric treatment. I understood what he was asking, understood that he wanted to protect his daughter from having a restraining order and criminal record. But I also remembered Alex's face when Jasmine showed up at his parents' house during Sunday dinner. I explained as gently as I could that we'd tried everything else, that we'd been patient and understanding and given Jasmine so many chances to stop. But she'd showed up at Alex's family home and that crossed a line we couldn't uncross. He went quiet for a long moment and then said he understood, that they'd cooperate with whatever we needed and provide any information that might help get Jasmine the mental health treatment she clearly required. Before he hung up, he said he was sorry. Not just for what Jasmine had done, but for not seeing it sooner. And I felt tears running down my face because this whole situation was destroying so many people beyond just me and Alex. Lincoln called back Tuesday afternoon to tell us the restraining order hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. He walked us through what to expect, explaining that Jasmine would be in the courtroom because she had the right to face her accusers and defend herself against the order. He warned us that she might try to speak directly to Alex, might try to make eye contact or gesture or do anything to get his attention, and prove their connection was real. We needed to stay calm no matter what happened, needed to let the legal process work, and trust that the judge would see through her delusion to the documented pattern of harassment and stalking. He said to dress professionally but not fancy, to answer questions clearly and honestly, and to focus on facts rather than emotions when we testified about what she'd done. His voice was steady and reassuring, but I could tell he was preparing us for how hard this was going to be, for having to face Jasmine in person, and recount everything she'd done while she sat there watching us. That weekend, Alex and I barely left my apartment, ordering takeout and watching movies we'd already seen, because neither of us could focus on anything new. We were both emotionally exhausted, drained from weeks of constant stress and fear, and looking over our shoulders everywhere we went. Alex kept apologizing like this was somehow his fault for being polite to my friend, for laughing at her jokes and complimenting her haircut when she asked directly, for all the normal friendly behavior that her brain had twisted into proof of secret love. It broke my heart because he'd done absolutely nothing wrong, had just been his usual kind and socially anxious self, and now he was carrying guilt for something that existed only in Jasmine's delusion. I told him over and over that this wasn't his fault, that mental illness doesn't need a reason or a cause, but I could see he didn't fully believe me yet. Sunday evening, I finally gave in to the temptation I'd been fighting all week and listened to one of Jasmine's voicemails. I regretted it immediately, wished I could unhear her sobbing voice saying she knew Alex was forced to do this by his controlling family, that their love was tested like Romeo and Juliet or some other tragic romance. She said she'd wait for him no matter how long it took, that real love could survive anything including restraining orders and family interference and temporary separations. Her voice had this dreamy quality to it, like she was narrating a movie in her head instead of talking about real life with real consequences, and I felt sick listening to how completely she believed the false reality she'd constructed. I deleted the voicemail and blocked her number on yet another level, then sat there feeling dirty and sad and angry all at once. Cordelia showed up at my apartment that evening with Thai food and a determined expression. She'd taken time to help us prepare mentally for the hearing, explaining in her calm professional voice that facing Jasmine in court might be harder than we expected, because delusional people can be very convincing in their false reality. They believe what they're saying completely, with no doubt or hesitation, and that conviction can make others question what they know to be true. She said we needed to stay grounded in facts, in the documented evidence and witness statements and police reports, rather than getting pulled into the emotional story Jasmine would tell. She practiced questions with us, had us recount incidents clearly and specifically, and reminded us that the judge had seen cases like this before, and would know what to look for in someone experiencing erotomania. Monday night, I couldn't sleep no matter how tired I was, my brain refusing to shut off as I lay there staring at my ceiling. I kept thinking about middle school Jasmine who'd moved from Arizona and didn't know anyone, how scared and alone she'd looked that first day, until I invited her to sit with my friend group at lunch. I remembered helping her catch up in classes, introducing her to everyone, promising we'd always be friends no matter what because that's what best friends did. The grief of losing that person to mental illness hit me in waves, rolling over me until I was crying in a way I hadn't let myself since this whole nightmare started. Alex held me while I sobbed, not saying anything because there was nothing to say, and I mourned the friendship that had shaped who I was for 15 years, but would never exist again in any form I recognized. Tuesday morning, I woke up with my stomach in knots because today was the hearing, and I'd have to see Jasmine in person for the first time since that night at Alex's parents' house. We got to the courthouse 40 minutes early because Alex wanted to be prepared, and Lincoln had told us to arrive with time to spare in case there were any last-minute issues. The building was this old brick structure downtown with marble floors that echoed every footstep and made everything feel more serious and official than I was ready for. Lincoln met us in the lobby wearing a dark suit and carrying a leather folder thick with papers, and he walked us through what would happen step by step so we'd know what to expect. We sat on a wooden bench in the hallway outside the courtroom, and I kept watching people walk by, wondering if any of them were going through something similar, or if our situation was as crazy as it felt. Alex held my hand, and his palm was sweating, which made me feel slightly better, because at least I wasn't the only one who was nervous. At exactly 9:30, I saw Jasmine come around the corner with a woman in a gray pantsuit who must have been her public defender. Jasmine had curled her hair and was wearing a blue dress with heels like she was going to brunch instead of a restraining order hearing, and when she saw Alex, her whole face lit up with this hopeful smile that made my skin crawl. She looked at him like he was her boyfriend who she hadn't seen in weeks, and was so excited to finally be near again, completely ignoring the fact that we were literally in court because she wouldn't leave him alone. Alex squeezed my hand so hard it hurt, and turned his body slightly away from her, and I could feel him shaking next to me. Jasmine's lawyer tried to guide her into the courtroom, but Jasmine kept looking back at Alex over her shoulder with that same dreamy expression, and I wanted to scream at her that this wasn't a romantic movie. This was real life with real consequences. We filed into the courtroom and sat at a table on the left side, while Jasmine and her defender sat on the right, and the whole time we were waiting for the judge, Jasmine kept stealing glances at Alex and smiling like they were sharing some private joke. The judge came in and everyone stood up, and she was this older woman with gray hair pulled back in a bun who looked tired and like she'd seen every kind of case imaginable. Lincoln stood up and started presenting our evidence in this calm, organized way that made everything sound even more disturbing when laid out chronologically. He showed the judge printed copies of Jasmine's texts to Alex where she said I'd given her permission to date him, then the security reports from Alex's office building documenting the 2 times she'd been escorted out, then the police report from when she showed up at his parents' house. He called Quentin as a witness, and Quentin described seeing Jasmine in the office lobby multiple times looking for Alex, and how uncomfortable it made everyone in their department. He brought up our mutual friends who'd submitted written statements about how Jasmine had told them different versions of events to keep them from comparing notes and realizing she was lying. Jasmine's public defender was this young woman who looked increasingly uncomfortable, as Lincoln kept stacking up evidence, and during a recess she asked to speak with Jasmine privately in the hallway. Through the courtroom door I could hear Jasmine's voice getting louder and more upset, insisting that the evidence was misinterpreted, and that Alex was just scared to admit his feelings publicly. When they came back in, the defender looked defeated and Jasmine's eyes were red from crying, but she still had this stubborn set to her jaw like she refused to accept what was happening. The judge called Jasmine to the stand and she walked up there with her shoulders back and her head high, and I realized she genuinely thought this was her chance to finally make everyone understand the truth as she saw it. She started talking about how she and Alex had developed this deep connection over the months, describing long conversations that I knew for a fact never happened because I was literally there during most of their interactions. She said Alex would look at her across the table during group dinners with such longing in his eyes that he'd find excuses to text her about random things just to have contact with her, that he'd mentioned her name constantly because he couldn't stop thinking about her. She spoke with such complete conviction, like she was describing memories that were absolutely real to her, and I finally understood how she'd managed to convince some of our friends initially, because she wasn't lying in her mind. She truly believed every word. She talked about how Alex had joined her gym to be near her, and how he'd shown up at places she frequented hoping to run into her, which was the exact opposite of reality where he'd been actively avoiding her and changing his routine to get away. The judge was taking notes and her expression stayed neutral, but I saw her eyes narrow slightly. When Jasmine described a conversation where Alex supposedly confessed his feelings, and Lincoln immediately pulled out Alex's work calendar, showing he'd been in a meeting during the time Jasmine claimed this happened, Jasmine didn't even seem bothered by the contradiction, just said the meeting must have been on a different day, because she remembered the conversation so clearly. When Lincoln asked her about the text where Alex explicitly said he wasn't interested, Jasmine smiled, and said that was just him being cautious because he was worried about hurting me, that she could see the real truth in how he looked at her when he thought no one was watching. The judge asked her to step down and called Alex to testify, and I could see his hands shaking as he walked up to the stand. His voice was quiet at first, and the judge had to ask him to speak up, and he described how scared he'd felt when Jasmine started showing up at his work and his gym. He talked about changing his entire routine, looking over his shoulder constantly, feeling unsafe in places that used to be normal parts of his day. He said he'd stopped going out with friends because he was worried she'd show up, that he'd started having anxiety about leaving his apartment because he never knew where she might appear next. His voice cracked when he talked about the night she showed up at his parents' house, and how violated he felt that she'd tracked down their address and invaded his family's home. The whole time Alex was speaking, I was watching Jasmine's face, and she was smiling, actually smiling like he was declaring his love instead of describing how much fear and stress she'd caused him. She had this soft, dreamy look in her eyes like she was watching a romantic scene in a movie, completely disconnected from the reality of what he was actually saying. The judge noticed too because she kept glancing at Jasmine with this increasingly concerned expression. When Alex finished testifying, the judge asked Jasmine to stand, and she looked directly at her and asked in a very clear, firm voice if Jasmine understood that Alex did not want any contact with her. Jasmine's smile didn't waver, and she said that what Alex says and what he really feels are two different things, that she can see the truth in his eyes even. When his words say something else, that their connection goes deeper than what can be expressed in a courtroom setting. The judge's expression went from concern to hard in about 2 seconds, and she said that she'd heard enough. She granted a 3-year restraining order requiring Jasmine to stay 500 feet away from me, from Alex, from both our apartments, from both our workplaces, and from Alex's parents' home. Jasmine's face crumpled and she started crying, saying the judge didn't understand, that this was all a huge mistake, that she and Alex just needed time to work things out without interference. Her lawyer put a hand on her arm trying to calm her down, but Jasmine kept talking, her voice getting louder and more desperate as she insisted that real love couldn't be stopped by a piece of paper. The bailiff stepped forward and Jasmine's lawyer physically guided her toward the exit while she was still crying and protesting. We walked out into the courthouse hallway, and I felt shaky with relief and exhaustion, like I'd been holding my breath for weeks and could finally let it out. Jasmine's parents were waiting outside the courtroom, and they approached us looking completely broken. Her mom had tears running down her face, and she kept apologizing, saying they had no idea things had gotten this bad because Jasmine had told them Alex was her boyfriend, and I was just jealous. Her dad looked about 10 years older than the last time I'd seen him at a barbecue 6 months ago, and he said they were taking her to get a full psychiatric evaluation that day because clearly something was very wrong. I could see they were grieving too, mourning the daughter they thought they knew and trying to accept this stranger who'd replaced her. Her mom reached out like she wanted to hug me, then pulled back, and she said she was so sorry for everything Jasmine had put us through. They'd make sure she got the help she needed. They walked away toward where Jasmine was standing with her lawyer near the elevators, and I watched them put their arms around her while she cried into her mom's shoulder. Lincoln pulled us aside and explained that violating the restraining order was a criminal offense that would result in immediate arrest and possible jail time. He said we needed to document any attempted contact, no matter how small, save every text or voicemail or social media message, and report it to the police right away. He warned us that the next few weeks would be the highest risk period, because that's when people either accept the reality of the order or escalate in a last attempt to make contact. We thanked him and walked out of the courthouse into bright sunshine that felt surreal after the fluorescent lights and heavy atmosphere inside. That night, Alex and I ordered Chinese food and sat on my couch in complete silence for almost an hour. We were both too exhausted to talk, and I kept replaying moments from the hearing in my head, seeing Jasmine's face when Alex testified about being scared, hearing her insist that she knew his real feelings better than he did. Alex finally broke the silence and said he felt like he could breathe for the first time in weeks, that having the legal protection made him feel safer, even though he knew a piece of paper couldn't physically stop her. I realized my shoulders were up near my ears, and when I tried to relax them, they actually hurt from holding so much tension for so long. The next few days were quiet in a way that felt almost wrong. I kept expecting my phone to ring with Jasmine's number, or to see her car parked outside my apartment, and every time I heard footsteps in the hallway, I tensed up waiting for a knock that never came. The absence of constant crisis was almost as stressful as the chaos had been because I didn't trust that it was really over. Couldn't quite believe that the restraining order would actually stop her when nothing else had. A week after the restraining order, my phone buzzed with a text from Myra. She sent me a screenshot of a friend request from Jasmine on Instagram with a long message attached. The message rambled about how everyone had abandoned her when she needed them most, and how she thought real friends would stand by her through anything. Myra had blocked her immediately and reported it to both me and Alex. I stared at the screenshot, feeling this weird mix of relief and sadness, because at least our friends were finally taking this seriously, instead of questioning whether Jasmine might have a point. Myra texted that she felt stupid for ever doubting me, and that seeing Jasmine try to manipulate her way back into their lives made her realize how sick Jasmine really was. 3 days later, Alex got an email from his workplace security with an update. Jasmine hadn't attempted to enter the building since the restraining order was served. The security team had circulated her photo to all the guards and updated the access system to flag her immediately if she tried to enter any company property. Quentin stopped by Alex's desk that afternoon and mentioned that word had spread around the office about what happened. Alex's face went red, and he looked down at his keyboard because he hated being the center of attention, and the idea of his coworkers knowing his personal business made him want to disappear. But Quentin said everyone was looking out for him now, and if anyone saw Jasmine anywhere near the building, they'd report it right away. That night, Alex told me he'd actually gotten emotional in the bathroom at work because people cared enough to protect him, and he wasn't used to that kind of support from anyone except me. 2 weeks after the hearing, I was making dinner when Jasmine's mom called. My stomach dropped when I saw her name on my phone because I didn't know if this meant more problems or what. Her voice sounded tired when she told me that Jasmine had been officially diagnosed with erotomania by the psychiatrist they'd taken her to see. She explained that Jasmine was starting treatment with medication and therapy, but still didn't believe she was sick. Jasmine kept insisting that everyone was conspiring against her, and that the diagnosis was just another way for me and Alex to turn people against their relationship. Her mom said at least Jasmine was in the mental health system now, where professionals could monitor her, and hopefully the medication would start working soon. I thanked her for calling and updating us, even though it must have been hard for her to admit her daughter needed that level of help. The next week, I made an appointment with a therapist because I couldn't stop thinking about all the times I'd explained away Jasmine's weird behavior. I kept replaying moments from the past few months, wondering if I should have seen this coming or done something differently. The therapist's office was in a building downtown, and I sat in the waiting room picking at my cuticles until she called me back. I told her everything from the beginning, and when I got to the part about Jasmine showing up at Sunday dinner, I started crying because I still couldn't believe my best friend since middle school had turned into someone I didn't recognize. The therapist explained that delusional disorders can emerge in early adulthood, and there was nothing I could have done to prevent it. She said Jasmine's brain was creating a false reality that felt completely real to her, and no amount of friendship or intervention from me would have stopped that process. It helped to hear that, but it didn't completely erase the what-ifs that kept running through my head at 3 a.m. That weekend, Alex and I had a long conversation on my couch about how this whole experience had changed us. He said he'd learned to trust his discomfort instead of being polite when something felt wrong. He admitted that Jasmine had made him uncomfortable pretty early on, but he'd ignored it because he didn't want to cause problems in my friendship, and now he realized that instinct was trying to warn him. I told him I needed to work on not explaining away concerning behavior just because I loved someone. I'd spent so much energy convincing myself that Jasmine's actions were just her being dramatic, or going through something instead of accepting that her behavior was genuinely dangerous. We both agreed that we'd rather hurt someone's feelings by setting boundaries than end up in another situation like this one. A month after the restraining order, we decided to cautiously start reclaiming our normal life. Alex went back to his regular gym, but only during off-peak hours when it was less crowded, and he could keep an eye on who was coming in. I started meeting friends at our usual coffee shop instead of avoiding places Jasmine might know about. It felt weird at first because I kept looking over my shoulder expecting to see her standing there watching us, but slowly the knot in my chest started to loosen, and I could actually enjoy my coffee without scanning the room every 30 seconds. Quentin invited us to a work happy hour at a bar near Alex's office, and Alex actually said yes, which surprised me. He'd been avoiding social events with coworkers for months because he was embarrassed about the whole situation. We showed up and his coworkers were supportive without being weird about it. Nobody asked intrusive questions or treated Alex like he was fragile. They just included him in conversations about normal work stuff and made jokes and acted like everything was fine. I watched Alex's shoulders relax as the night went on, and he laughed at something Quentin said. It was the first time in months that I'd seen him look genuinely comfortable around other people. The next week, I was at the grocery store picking up milk when I saw Jasmine's aunt in the produce section. She'd been at family barbecues and birthday parties throughout my entire friendship with Jasmine. I'd known her since I was 12 years old. She saw me at the same time I saw her and immediately looked down at the apples she was examining. She grabbed a bag and walked quickly toward the other side of the store without making eye contact. It stung worse than I expected because I realized this situation had cost me more than just Jasmine. It had fractured connections with people who were part of my childhood and who probably heard some twisted version of events that made me look like the villain. 6 weeks after the hearing, Lincoln called while I was at work. I stepped outside to take the call, and he told me that Jasmine had violated the restraining order by sending a letter to Alex's parents' house. The letter rambled about true love conquering all obstacles, and how their connection was too strong for legal documents to destroy. Lincoln said we needed to report it immediately, so there was documentation of the violation. He explained that even though it was just a letter and not a physical confrontation, any contact was a violation and needed to be taken seriously. I called Alex right away, and he sounded exhausted when he answered. He said he'd hoped the restraining order would be enough to make Jasmine stop, but apparently her delusion was stronger than legal consequences. The police visited Jasmine that afternoon with a warning about the violation. Her parents called us a few hours later apologizing over and over. Her dad's voice sounded completely worn out when he said they were increasing Jasmine's psychiatric supervision and making sure she understood that any more contact would result in criminal charges. I could hear how exhausted they both sounded dealing with a daughter who refused to accept reality no matter how many doctors or lawyers or judges told her she was wrong. Alex and I sat at my kitchen table the next morning with coffee. Neither of us was drinking. Lincoln had emailed us copies of the violation report, and we stared at the documents like they might suddenly change what happened. I asked if we should press criminal charges, and Alex rubbed his eyes with both hands before saying he didn't know anymore. We'd been dealing with this for months, and every consequence just seemed to make Jasmine dig deeper into her delusion instead of pulling her out. I reminded him that her parents said she was in treatment now, and maybe the warning would be enough. Alex nodded slowly and said he wanted to believe treatment would work, but he was tired of hoping things would get better only to have Jasmine show up somewhere new. We called Lincoln and told him we wanted the formal warning documented but wouldn't pursue charges this time. Lincoln said that was reasonable given the circumstances, but warned us to report any future contact immediately, because patterns of violation usually got worse instead of better. He told us the warning would make it clear that next time meant arrest with no exceptions, and Jasmine's parents had been informed of the consequences. After we hung up, Alex said he felt like we were being too soft, but also didn't want to be the reason someone went to jail when they were sick. I understood exactly what he meant because I kept going back and forth between anger at what Jasmine put us through and sadness that my best friend's brain had broken in a way that destroyed everything. 2 months after the restraining order was granted, I was cleaning out my closet and found a shoebox full of old photos. I pulled out the stack and started flipping through pictures of Jasmine and me from high school. There was one from homecoming sophomore year, where we were both wearing terrible dresses and making silly faces at the camera. Another showed us at graduation with our arms around each other and genuine smiles that came from years of actual friendship. I found photos from college visits where we'd explored each other's campuses and pretended to be students there. Birthday parties and random weekend hangouts and inside jokes captured in moments that felt so normal and happy. I sat on my bedroom floor surrounded by evidence of a friendship that used to be real and started crying. Not the angry crying from when everything was actively falling apart, but the grief crying that comes when you finally accept something is gone. The Jasmine in these photos was my best friend who helped me study for tests and listened to me complain about bad dates and knew exactly how to make me laugh when I was sad. That person didn't exist anymore, and maybe she'd been disappearing for longer than I wanted to admit. I looked at a photo of us from middle school right after we met and wondered if there had been signs even then that I missed, or if mental illness just happened sometimes without warning. My therapist kept saying I couldn't have prevented this, but sitting there with 15 years of friendship scattered around me made it hard to believe that. My next therapy session happened 3 days after I found the photos. I told my therapist about crying over the pictures, and she asked what made me sad about seeing them. I explained that it felt like mourning someone who was still alive, because the Jasmine I knew was gone, but replaced by someone wearing her face who believed things that weren't real. My therapist nodded and said, "Grief doesn't only happen when someone dies." She explained that I was grieving the loss of who Jasmine used to be, and the friendship we had, and that was completely valid even though Jasmine was still physically alive. I asked how I was supposed to grieve someone while also maintaining a restraining order against them, and she said those two things didn't contradict each other. She told me I could be sad about losing my friend while still protecting myself from the person she became. I could remember the good parts of our friendship while acknowledging that continuing any relationship now would be dangerous. She said holding both of those truths at the same time was hard, but necessary, and it didn't make me a bad person for choosing safety over loyalty to someone who couldn't respect boundaries. I left that session feeling like someone finally gave me permission to be sad without feeling guilty about the restraining order. I could miss who Jasmine was, and still know that keeping her away from us was the right choice. A week later, Alex and I were making dinner at his apartment when he told me something that surprised me. He said his anxiety had decreased a lot over the past few weeks, and he was sleeping through the night again instead of waking up at every sound. I realized I'd noticed him seeming more relaxed but hadn't connected it to the absence of constant threat. He explained that for months he'd been looking over his shoulder everywhere he went, checking his car for signs someone had been near it and dreading his commute because he never knew if Jasmine would be waiting somewhere. Now he could go to work without scanning the parking lot first. He could go to the gym without wondering if she'd show up on the treadmill next to him. He could visit his parents without worrying about finding her on their porch. I watched him chop vegetables with steady hands and realized how much tension he'd been carrying that I'd gotten used to seeing. His shoulders weren't hunched anymore, and he wasn't constantly checking his phone for notifications from unknown numbers. I told him I was glad he could breathe again, and he said it made him realize how much stress we'd both been living with for months. I hadn't thought about my own stress as much because I was focused on protecting him, but hearing him describe the relief of normalcy made me notice that I felt lighter too. We weren't jumping at shadows anymore, and that felt like getting part of our lives back. 3 months after the restraining order, I met up with Myra and 2 other friends from our group at a coffee shop. We'd been trying to rebuild our friendships after everything that happened with Jasmine, and it was slowly starting to feel normal again. Nobody mentioned Jasmine directly, but there was this understanding between us that we'd all learned something from missing the warning signs. Myra talked about a guy she'd been dating who gave her a weird feeling, and instead of ignoring it like she might have before, she asked direct questions and trusted her gut when his answers didn't add up. Another friend mentioned that she'd been reading about manipulation tactics because she felt stupid for believing Jasmine's different versions of events. I realized our entire friend group had been changed by what happened, and we were all more careful now about taking people at their word without evidence. We didn't talk about Jasmine much anymore because there wasn't anything new to say, and rehashing it just made everyone uncomfortable. But sometimes someone would reference something that happened before, and we'd all have this moment of shared understanding about how different things were now. Our group had settled into a new normal that didn't include Jasmine and probably never would again. It was sad in a way, but also felt stable and safe, and I was grateful these friends had stuck around after everything got messy. 4 days later, I got a text message from a number I didn't recognize. My stomach dropped before I even opened it because unknown numbers meant potential violation and more legal drama. But when I read the message, it was from Jasmine's mom using a new phone number. She said she wanted to update me on Jasmine's treatment and asked if I was willing to hear it. I called Alex before responding, and we decided together that hearing updates from her parents were different from contact with Jasmine herself. I texted back that I was willing to listen, and Jasmine's mom called me within minutes. Her voice sounded tired but also cautiously hopeful when she explained that Jasmine was responding to medication and starting to have moments of clarity. I asked what that meant, and she said Jasmine had stopped insisting that Alex was in love with her, which was huge progress even if it seemed like a small thing. She explained that Jasmine still struggled to accept full responsibility for what happened, and sometimes slipped back into thinking everyone was against her. But there were moments now where Jasmine acknowledged that her thoughts about Alex weren't based in reality, and that was more progress than they'd seen in months. I asked if Jasmine had said anything about me, and her mom paused before saying Jasmine remembered our friendship, but couldn't quite reconcile the person she remembered with the person who got a restraining order. I told her I understood and thanked her for the update. After we hung up, I felt this complicated mix of relief that Jasmine might be getting better, and sadness that even with treatment, she might never fully understand what she put us through. The following Sunday, Alex's parents invited us over for dinner. I felt nervous driving to their house because the last time we'd been there, Jasmine was sitting on their porch refusing to leave. But when we arrived, everything was calm and normal. His mom answered the door with a smile, and his dad was in the kitchen making Alex's favorite pot roast. We sat at the same dining room table where the crisis had happened months ago, but this time we talked about regular things like Alex's work and his mom's book club and plans for the holidays. His mom had made mashed potatoes exactly how Alex liked them, and there was apple pie for dessert. We laughed about silly things, and his dad told stories about Alex as a kid that made everyone crack up. The whole evening felt peaceful in a way that seemed almost miraculous after months of chaos and fear. When we were leaving, Alex's mom hugged me tight and whispered that she was glad we were safe now. Driving home, I realized how much I'd missed normal family dinners where the biggest stress was whether there would be enough dessert. The absence of crisis felt like the greatest gift anyone could have given us. 4 months after the hearing, Alex surprised me by suggesting we take a weekend trip to the beach. We hadn't left town since everything started with Jasmine because staying local felt safer, and we could respond quickly if something happened. But Alex said he was tired of letting fear control our choices, and he wanted to do something normal that couples our age did. I agreed immediately because I'd been craving a break from all the locations tied to the stalking. We drove 3 hours to a beach town neither of us had been to before and checked into a small hotel near the water. Walking on the sand that first evening felt incredibly freeing because Jasmine didn't know we were there and couldn't show up unexpectedly. We could just exist without constantly scanning our surroundings for threats. That night we had dinner at a seafood restaurant, and Alex seemed more relaxed than I'd seen him in almost a year. We talked about things that had nothing to do with restraining orders or court hearings or mental illness. We made plans for where else we wanted to travel and what we wanted to do next summer. It felt like reclaiming our relationship from the shadow Jasmine's delusion had cast over everything. On our second day at the beach, Alex and I were walking along the shore when he stopped and turned to face me. The sun was setting behind him and his expression was serious but not worried. He said he'd been thinking a lot about our relationship and what he wanted for our future. I felt my heart speed up because serious conversations could go either direction. But then he smiled and said he wanted to move forward instead of letting what happened define us forever. He talked about maybe moving in together next year when my lease was up. He mentioned places he wanted to travel with me and things he wanted us to experience together. He said he was tired of making decisions based on fear and wanted to start building the life we actually wanted, instead of the one Jasmine's stalking had forced us into. I felt tears in my eyes, but good ones this time because I wanted all of those things too. We'd spent so long in survival mode that I'd almost forgotten we were supposed to be building something together. Standing there on the beach with Alex talking about our future felt like coming back to life after months of just trying to get through each day. Driving home from the beach on Sunday afternoon, I realized something had shifted inside me. For the first time in months, I felt actually excited about the future, instead of just relieved that each day passed without incident. The trauma of everything that happened would always be part of our story, and I'd probably always have moments of looking over my shoulder or feeling anxious when I saw someone who looked like Jasmine. But sitting in the car with Alex discussing which furniture we'd keep if we moved in together and debating whether we wanted a one-bedroom or two, I understood that what happened didn't have to be the whole story. We got to decide what came next, and that power felt significant after months of reacting to someone else's delusions. The restraining order still had over 2 years left, and Jasmine was still in treatment with an uncertain outcome. But Alex and I were building something that belonged to just us, and that felt like taking back control of our lives. 5 months after the restraining order started, my phone rang while I was making breakfast, and the caller ID showed it was her dad. My stomach dropped because we hadn't talked since the courthouse hallway, when he apologized for not seeing the signs sooner. I answered, and he sounded tired but less panicked than the last time we spoke. He told me he wanted to give me an update about how things were going with treatment. His voice was careful, like he was worried about upsetting me, but he said something had shifted in the past few weeks that felt significant. She had finally accepted that she needed professional help instead of insisting everyone else was wrong. He explained she was working with a psychiatrist who specialized in delusional disorders, and the doctor had her on medication that seemed to be helping. The progress was slow, and there were still bad days where old thought patterns came back, but she was starting to understand that what she believed about Alex wasn't based in reality. I stood there holding the phone and feeling this weird mix of relief and sadness because part of me had wondered if she'd ever get better. He said the psychiatrist explained it might take years of consistent treatment, and even then recovery wasn't guaranteed, but at least she was trying now instead of fighting everyone. I asked the question that had been sitting in my chest for months, whether she had said anything about me or our friendship. There was this long pause on the other end of the line, and I could hear him breathing. He finally said she had expressed regret about losing the friendship, but still struggled to fully accept her role in what happened. She knew things went wrong, but couldn't quite connect her actions to the consequences in a way that showed real understanding. He said the psychiatrist was working on that part specifically because accepting responsibility was crucial for actual recovery. His voice got quieter when he said maybe someday she'd be healthy enough to make real amends, but that was years away if it happened at all. He wasn't asking me to forgive her or wait around for an apology that might never come. He just wanted me to know she wasn't the same person who showed up at Sunday dinner anymore, even if she wasn't fully well yet either. I thanked him for calling and told him I hoped treatment continued helping her. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time thinking about the friend I used to know and the stranger she became. That evening, Alex came over and I told him about the phone call. We ended up having this long conversation about whether we'd ever accept an apology from her if she offered one in the future. Alex said he'd been thinking about it too because part of moving forward meant deciding what forgiveness looked like for us. He said he could probably forgive her someday for what she put us through, especially now that we knew it was a genuine mental illness and not just manipulation. But forgiveness didn't mean going back to how things were before or letting her back into our lives. I agreed completely because even if she got healthy and understood what she did, the damage to our friendship was permanent. Too much had happened and too much trust had been broken. We both felt okay with that boundary, and it felt good to be on the same page about it. Alex said he didn't want to carry anger forever, but he also didn't want to pretend everything could be fixed with an apology. I realized that's exactly how I felt too, like we could let go of the worst feelings without opening ourselves up to being hurt again. We talked about how strange it was that someone we cared about became someone we needed legal protection from, and how that grief was separate from the relief of being safe now. 6 months after the restraining order was granted, our lives had settled into something that felt genuinely normal again. Alex got a promotion at work that he'd been working toward for over a year, and his boss specifically mentioned how impressed they were with his performance despite everything he'd been dealing with. I started taking a pottery class at the community center on Thursday nights, something I'd always wanted to try but kept putting off. The class was full of people who had no connection to the drama that had consumed months of my life, and I loved having that separate space where I was just someone learning to throw clay. We were planning a trip to visit Alex's college friends next month, people he hadn't seen in person since everything started because we'd been too anxious to travel. His friends knew the basic situation, but mostly they just wanted to hang out and catch up on normal life stuff. I bought new luggage for the trip and felt excited instead of worried, which seemed like a small thing but meant everything after months of constant fear. Alex and I went to movies without scanning the parking lot first. I met friends for coffee without that tight feeling in my chest, wondering if she'd show up. We existed in the world like regular people again instead of like targets waiting for the next incident. The restraining order still had 2.5 years left on it, and we'd been told through her parents that there had been no further violations since the letter incident. Her parents reported she was stable on medication and living with them while continuing intensive therapy 3 times a week. I felt sad about how everything turned out, because this wasn't the ending I would have chosen for a 15-year friendship. But I didn't regret protecting ourselves, and I didn't regret the restraining order. Sometimes caring about someone means accepting you can't fix them, and you have to prioritize your own safety. That's what I told my therapist, and she said it showed real growth in understanding healthy boundaries. On a random Tuesday evening, Alex and I were sitting on my apartment balcony watching the sunset and drinking iced tea. The air was warm, and I could hear kids playing in the courtyard below. Alex turned to me and said he was grateful we got through everything together because it proved we could handle hard things as a team. He said a lot of couples would have broken up under that kind of pressure, but somehow it made us stronger instead of tearing us apart. I agreed and realized I trusted him more now than I did before everything happened, which seemed backwards but made sense. We'd seen each other at our most scared and most stressed, and neither of us ran. We made decisions together and supported each other and came out the other side still wanting to build a life together. For the first time since that midnight phone call 6 months ago when everything started falling apart, I felt completely at peace with where we were. The fear that had been sitting in my chest for so long was finally gone, replaced by this quiet certainty that we were going to be okay. I was excited about the future instead of just relieved to survive each day. We had plans and dreams again instead of just crisis management strategies. Alex reached over and held my hand, and we sat there watching the sky turn pink and orange. I thought about how 6 months ago I couldn't have imagined feeling this calm or this hopeful. The trauma would always be part of our story, and I'd probably always have moments of looking over my shoulder or feeling anxious when I saw someone who looked like her from behind. But sitting there with Alex planning our trip and talking about maybe getting a dog next year and debating whether we wanted to move in together when my lease ended, I understood that what happened didn't have to define everything that came after. We got to write the next chapters ourselves, and that power felt significant after months of reacting to someone else's delusions.